enclosure, right? Like that's all you're going to do, right?
Yeah.
Are we good to go, Brad?
We are live.
Oh, okay. All right.
I just put us live, so yeah, that's you're good. Oh mercy, this has been a day.
Let's go then.
It has been a day. Someone wants to check it. Let me check and see if that. Well, if you'll check just briefly, Chris.
All right.
So
I think your face is going to cover me up.
Nope.
Oh, no, it's good. Oh, nice. Okay, let me check the audio on my phone.
Yeah, I just want to make sure you guys are coming through too. I mean, I know I'm coming through. If I'm not coming through, we've got bigger problems.
Well, we can hear you loud and clear.
Well,
But that's
the trick is what?
It's never what.
Oh. No, I searched on your typical IT guys and another channel popped up.
I know I saw that a while back. Yeah, somebody apparently is talking to us too.
We're good.
Hi, Sally.
Oh, that's my wife.
She was looking for us.
how many people do we usually get live watching?
Nah, not that many. The most
like
I think
5,
we've had
maybe
10. We've had 10 on a late start, on a really late, like an
Okay.
intentional late start.
It's better. I thought you were going to say 0.
There's at least usually 3 or 4 live.
half an hour late.
So, well, hold up, Chris. This is standard. It's 7 o'clock. This is the normal start. I don't
What's
think.
funny is we lost you.
No, go ahead. I stopped.
Oh, I was gonna say what's funny is Chris texted me at 6. He's like, "Hey, what time are you gonna be there?" I'm like, 6:30. He's like, "Oh, that's the time we start." I'm like, "Oh, I'll be here early," but you guys don't really start till 7.
We intended to start at 6:30 today. I'll be honest.
I asked Brad what time, and he said 6:30.
I did. I said 6:30, and then at 4:45 or 5 o'clock is when that update went through my desktop, and I've been scrambling. I spent an hour trying to get that thing back, and but I am on my desktop. It's just a different desktop. You can't see it, but it's my little tiny boy that I like to play with, the little Lenovo P360 Ultra. Which, by the way, has 8 display outs. I don't think you can use more than 7, but you can actually display video signals to 7 different things on this thing, which is kind of nice. But, start the show off the right way, call ourselves out who we are. We are not your typical IT guys. Donald's not here, so we've got a guest for him. He was sick. I'm giving him credit this time. He literally was sick, so I mean, I don't think he even worked yesterday either. But yeah, no, and we're just a couple of people with the dream of helping others better navigate the crazy world of workstations and other fun work technologies. This is episode 24. It is titled, "Why is 10 Gigabit Ethernet not the standard in 2022?" We're going to have conversations about a lot of all things networking. We do want to get the fun piece out of the way first, which is, if you didn't know it, AMD has launched a new graphics card this week, the RX 7900 XTX and 7900 XT. They've also, that goes alongside with NVIDIA. Since the last time we talked, NVIDIA's got the 4090 out there, and the 86,000, which melts PCI Express power connectors that they designed. And from what I understand, most of it though is built around the actual, what do you call it? The connectors. The 3 8-pin or 4 8-pin to 16-pin connectors. That's what it's based around. It's not the actual, like if you have like a 16-pin cable, those are fine. But it's when you go to those little short. I have one sitting around. I bet I can find it.
I don't have any over here.
The little extenders.
Yeah, it was like the adapters. The adapters.
Yeah, the little adapters. Okay.
Those ones that come in, and usually I have something like that sitting around me just for stupidness. But I don't see what's sitting right here. But those were apparently the problem, or that's what they're, people are saying or claiming mostly. But I mean, they melted cards too. They caught cards on fire from electrical shorts. So that wasn't good. It does seem all but confirmed that the Ada RTX 6000 will not come with NVLink, which is disappointing. We talked about it from the pictures last time, but I mean, realistically, that's what I mean. I've yet to hear a confirmation the other way, but until NVIDIA officially announces that they can and physically ships them, they could always change their mind somehow. But from what I understand, because of the way the die is set up, it was fused off on the die. The big thing that I talk about when we talk about the new AMD launch, though, is it's multi-chip. So it's the first MCM-based, multi-chip module-based GPU that we have out there. So that to me, I don't want to stress it enough. That's not a huge deal, but that is kind of a big deal. I'll pull my screen up for just a second so you guys can see what I'm saying though. But yeah, it's a big boy. I mean, it's a little bit bigger than a 2-slot card. It's 2.5 slots, what they're calling it.
I mean, it's better than a 4090 Founders Edition.
Oh, better than a 4090 PS4 and PS5 edition.
Yeah, I just saw one of those in a computer
The
today.
Asus is like.
I know. I just saw one the other day. I was in shock how big it was.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Chris, you and I have been talking about new computers for a while, and I'm not sure that I'm gonna build a new personal rig for myself. And I don't think I can go with the 4090 just because of that. Like so I have. I don't know what you guys can actually see behind me, but you can probably see some of the boxes on the Teams link or whatnot, and I can go back to the screen and maybe can see some of it. But I have, the last gaming card, if you want to call it that, I bought was a Titan Maxwell.
Which is a 2-slot, actually 2-slot.
Blower card, though.
Right.
And
that was like 150 watts.
No, it was more than that.
Oh?
It required an 8-pin and a 6-pin. So it was like 280, probably.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, it might have been 300 even. I wouldn't have been 300. It's probably 280, 275, something like that. But a blower card can exhaust that much heat. That's not a problem. I've never really liked cards that exhausted in the case because all that does is just, you've got to have so much better, either you've got to truly have a strong pressure positive case, or you're starving something by going pressure negative to pull the heat out. So I'm not a big fan of exhausting in the case cards in the first place. So it's kind of hard, but that's why I've had workstation cards since then. I have 2 A6000s NVLink right now. Prior to that, I had a regular A6000 and an old school Quadro 6000, which I still don't like the Ada RTX 6000. I've had dual RTX 5000s in cases. I mean, it's just I had to go back to the P5000. Pascal was a great generation. The first generation that got 16 gigs on a card. I loved that thing. I still have 2 of them at the office. I have to say this. Well, okay, first of all, we haven't done this because Chris is a bad person. We have a guest that's filling in for Donald. Why don't we let him introduce himself?
Yeah, cool, thanks. I'm Mike with Nerds to Go. We do computer repair support for small businesses and residential customers. We're here in Cary. I've known Chris for, I don't know, a year now? Yeah, something like that, right? Yeah, we've known each other for a while. We do a lot of networking together. We kind of...
Oh, no, it's good. It's good.
We kind of know a lot of the same people and just started working together and partnered together, and he's asked me to come on, and I am not a typical IT guy as well. I'm actually not an IT guy. I don't want to be working on computers. It's not what I like to do, but I love selling them, and I love the networking piece of it, and I like really just helping people with computers. That's kind of what I do. Like, I really like to help people with technology, computers, networking, wireless, that kind of stuff. So I'm glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah.
All right, so because this is kind of a more networking focused thing, and obviously we space out and go down rabbit holes. That happens. We've kind of already done that.
We just did that.
So I'm going to start the questioning for this, just because I've been asking a bunch of other people, because I've been kind of polling the audience, and I'm going to pull up the LinkedIn poll here in a little while. But I've been kind of polling my friends, my coworkers, my employees, all different kinds, and I've kind of had the questionnaire thought of mine is, what was the first computer you remember having an integrated gigabit NIC on the motherboard, and how long ago was, or when was that, if you can remember it?
Oh, Jesus.
Right?
I mean, a long time ago.
So I want to start this off because there's a little bit of a history lesson that I think everybody needs, in my opinion. But I want to start this off by kind of going backwards in time. So obviously, everyone, mainly from Wi-Fi, probably heard of 802.11, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So the audience should know what 802.11 is. What most people don't recognize is that the gigabit and the cabled standards, the Ethernet standards, are classified by the IEEE as 802.3.
Mm-hmm.
And the first standard, which was experimental, was in which wasn't experimental, I should say, was in 1983. Now, granted, that's basically pre 10 base T, which 10 base T, the number in front represents the megabit per second going down, and then you get like 10G base T, which is 10 gigabit. But yeah, 802.3A was in 1980, or 802.3 was in 1983, and A came out in 1985. All right, that is Brad minus 3 years. that is uncannily crazy.
That's me minus 6 years.
Well, I was born in 1973, so.
Hey, there you go. Well, here you go then. 1973. That's the year that Ethernet was actually first conceptualized and built over coax, and it could transfer a whopping 2.94 megabits a second.
That was it. Wow.
Which keep in mind, that was, I mean,
that was a lot.
We didn't even have like 28K modems until the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
So that, like, to be able to go over over a network of anything at that speed was blazing fast. Of course, back then packets weren't near as big as they are now, anyways. But the actual 1 gigabit standard was defined in 1999 as IEEE's 802.3 AB. Obviously, most people kind of know that IEEE is the institute. Don't know, but the IEEE is the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers. It's a nonprofit organization. They set networking standards. They do a lot of other things too, but networking standards is one of the things that they are definitely defined by. I use the 802.11 because most people remember A, B, G, N, AC, AX. The names that we called Wi-Fi before it was Wi-Fi 6/6E and Wi-Fi 5 going back. But yeah, 1999 is when we just defined gigabit 1000 base T gigabit over a copper pair Ethernet. That blows my mind. And realistically, I use this example. So 2002, my family bought a Dell PC. It was the first PC I think we bought in a while that had a PCI-based modem, a 56K modem, and it also had a gigabit Ethernet port on the motherboard. That should kind of backtrack you and kind of give you the idea that these things have been around the block well over a time or two. So, I can pose the question to you. how often are you installing a network interface or network systems that are seeing the folks that look for network systems where they're looking for, multi-gigabit?
Rarely.
Same.
And the sad fact is, obviously I think we have a synonymous, now that you don't have a modem built into the actual machine these days. I think that kind of gets things synonymous with, okay, gigabit Ethernet means that if my internet's not faster than a gigabit, I would never need more than a gigabit of internet or a gigabit connection, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I would agree. Most people,
they don't understand the difference between internet and intranet.
They don't understand local area network versus wide area network, right? That's where the confusion is.
Yep. LAN versus WAN. I love that.
Right.
Love
exactly.
That term. So obviously local area networks and Ethernet, they were designed for colleges. That's why whenever you hear somebody talking about a network, they talk like a network campus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because colleges were kind of the first research institutes and whatnot. That was kind of the first place that these were put in place. And comically, local area networks were put in place for exactly what they're used for today, which is file shares and printer shares. But I guess that the purpose that I always look back to is looking at corporations. You would think that as we've gotten to the standard where we're at now, at least people would be going, hey, why aren't we running multi-gigabit or something like that? Why aren't we running 2.5 gig? Well, that kind of cracks me up some too. But I guess that's the kind of thought process you have to have. Okay, question: do you know why we don't? So first and foremost, one of the main barriers to entry for 10 gigabit, and the reason that it has taken so long to kind of get there, was because your old switches, they went from, you either had the option of gigabit or 10 gig. A multi-gigabit switch was not a thing until, actually, let me tell you the other two standards. It would have been 2016 is when they first introduced that standard. So probably a year behind that, maybe a couple years behind that, 2019 or so. 2020 is probably when I don't remember when the first multi-gig router I bought or switch I bought was. Probably back in that time frame. But yeah, so you only had the option of gigabit or 10 gig. And I don't know why people think Cat 6 cabling was expensive, but it really wasn't. But it's just different shielding. So it's not that much. But the point was that you had this there was no in between. And so the question I'll pose that you guys kind of ponder on is, why was multi-gigabit introduced? So first and foremost, the actual 10 gig standard, the physical 10 gig standard. Anybody know when it was defined? Want to take a guess?
I mean, if the 1 gig standard was defined in what'd you say, 83?
99.
10 gig.
99
was 99. It was the 1 gig. The 10 gig was probably a couple of years after, I would guess. 2002?
A little bit further behind that. Well, let's see what it's telling me. So over fiber, 10 gig Ethernet was dedicated in 2002. You took the words out of my mouth.
20 years to be.
But that's over fiber, though, right?
That's over fiber. Now, over Ethernet itself, it was 2006. Over twisted pair.
Right.
And then over copper, well, I call it copper, but over twin axial cables or coax, basically, dual coax cables, it was defined in 2004. But okay, so 2006 is the standard. All right. Why did it take us so long to? So the question I'd pose is twofold for both of y'all. So that's we kind of poll the viewer and poll you at the same time. But why was it that we actually instituted the standard of multi-gigabit in Ethernet, 1, and 2? Where was at what point in time was it? Do you guys kind of imagine what other technology was it that basically kind of get what I'm saying this, but what other technology benefited from having that standard be put into place? Because it was made a requirement because of another piece of technology.
I feel like SSD might be the answer, and answer to number 2. I don't have a date answer.
Well, I've already told you the date. I was more saying that it's the technology, but there was a driving base behind it. There was a company that was driving behind it, more importantly, but there was a driving base of a piece of technology that was coming out that dictated we needed faster Ethernet, but we didn't need 10 gig.
Was it the increased Wi-Fi speeds? Like Wi-Fi 6 coming out?
Ding, ding, ding. Houston, we have an answer.
Yeah, because if you have Wi-Fi 6, but you can't push, Wi-Fi 6 is going to go over a gig, right? But if you can't push over that, you need another standard to get you up to 2.5 and 5 and all the other standards, right? Otherwise, you're throttled. Like you're not going to be able to use the full capacity of it, which makes sense.
And actually, what it became a point of, it wasn't actually 6, it was 6E.
It was 6E, yeah, right.
So the thought behind, so everyone kind of, I think they missed the picture with Wi-Fi, the big enhancement of Wi-Fi 6, which is, it was 6E, over 6, which is, it's not so much that the bandwidth that Wi-Fi can handle changed, it's that the amount of connected devices changed, 1.
Right.
And 2, the amount of total bandwidth the router had changed because of the amount of devices that could connect to it. So I think people, they look at networks and they look at switches the same way. So if you have a 48-port Ethernet switch, if it's a gigabit, 48-port gigabit Ethernet switch, that physical switch is capable of handling up to 96 gigabit transfer across the entire switch, because it's full duplex running across everything, and it's got to, so basically that means it's got gig up, gig down at the same time, and it's got to match the speed of all those ports for the worst case scenario if all 48 ports are occupied and in use. That's one of the other major factors to why 10 gig did not take off. And usually if you find it in a switch, it's like 1 or 2 ports.
It's usually uplinks, right? Usually you're using that for uplinks to the router to a server, a 10 gig server or something like that.
Pretty much, yeah. And a lot of SFP plus ports is what they are. They're not usually regular.
They're not Ethernet. Yeah, they're SFP, which I don't know if you've ever dealt with those, but they get insanely hot and overheat when you convert them over to Ethernet.
I've been using. I have two transceivers in my apartment right now.
Yeah.
They're not cool, that's for sure. But they're also, some of them have gotten better over time. And you also don't, that's the one thing that I hate when people think about it. So you say it's a 10 gig connection, but yet you do have some losses over the transceiver itself. So it's like 9.8, 9.9, something like that. It's not really 10 gig. But I mean, it's as close as you physically get. You're
better than one.
Oh God, yeah. I think everything is. So, okay, Mike, you were talking, before we got going on with this, you were talking about some of the networking stuff that you guys utilize. Are you seeing a lot more of the Wi-Fi 6 and 6E deployments now, or is that something that's still kind of slow rolling?
It's slow rolling, but we are deploying it. You know, there's an issue with Wi-Fi 6 and 6E, especially if you have we do a lot of small businesses, and sometimes those small businesses don't upgrade their computers very often. So we've actually run into instances where we've deployed Wi-Fi 6 and 6E, and older computers can't see the wireless network, right?
Wow.
Because of the standard that it connects, or it presents the SSID to the computer, right? So we've actually had to make sure that when we go into a small business, or even in people's homes are probably the worst because they hold on computers forever. But we're deploying it more and more now because the prices come down. But it is an issue in older environments.
How do you do a hot fix on an older computer?
You got to get a new Wi-Fi adapter for that older computer that can see Wi-Fi 6, whether it's USB or internal or something like that, or I mean, most of the time it's like a 10-year-old computer, and you're like, dude,
Just get a new computer.
Get a new
Time to
computer.
update. This
Yeah,
is,
let's get this piece of junk out of here and get something better.
That's what I thought.
You know?
it's a security concern at that point.
It is, bingo. That's 100% right. But it is amazing how much quicker it is, Wi-Fi 6.
Oh,
6E. It's night and day. It's insane how fast it is.
I'm still running. Well, my modem that I bought died, so now I'm renting a modem router combo from Spectrum. That way they can actually like get into it. And I'm pretty sure we're still on like Wi-Fi 5 or Cat 5.
Yeah, I don't think that Spectrum router, I don't think is Wi-Fi 6 or 6E. Although the newer one maybe. Yeah, it's probably the older.
And then we're connecting the media server to the router, typically over Powerline.
Yeah, I've had success with Powerline.
It's pretty cool.
It works pretty
You know,
well,
I would agree. I've never really heard a lot of bad things about power. As long as you're not like dealing with a lot of power interference.
Yeah, and you can't be too far away. But like a lot of people they badmouth it, but I've used it in my house and it works pretty good, man. Like it's not bad.
Just don't put it like right beside like a dryer.
Yeah, and you can't. And like some people they're like, oh, I plugged in my power line over Ethernet and it's plugged into like a surge protector.
Don't do that.
I'm like, dude, it's not gonna work.
It's dead.
It's not gonna work. You know, the other thing it's funny too when he's talking about Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi 6 is we do a lot of stuff where we're going to people's homes and they're like, they don't understand the speed of the Wi-Fi is not the speed. Like they'll be like, oh, I got Google Fiber and I get 1 gig or 2.5 gigs of Google Fiber, but when I run my Wi-Fi speed test, I'm only getting 600 megs.
Because your Wi-Fi router is terrible.
Well, but there's also all these. You're never going to get 2.5 gigs over Wi-Fi, right? Like the farther away you get from there's all these factors. Anyway, we'll go in, like somebody will be like, they keep increasing their internet speed. They'll be like, oh, I went from 1 gig to 2 gig to 3, and some of the, like AT&T has a 5 gig offering now for residential customers. 5 gigs.
Up and down. No, keep in mind, that's asymmetrical. Up and down 5 gigs.
Yeah, and it's insane.
How do you do 5 gig up for residential?
My question is
Fiber.
Nobody needs that.
What?
Like,
no.
Hold back. No, back up. Chris, I'm raising my hand. Yes. AT&T, if you want to bring 5 gig to my house, please do. I'll take it. I'll use it all day long.
Anyway, it's pretty funny. Because like, people will have their router in a closet in the basement, and then they wonder why they can't get internet up on the 3rd floor, and all they do is keep calling AT&T, increasing the bandwidth on their modem. Oh my God, it's pretty fun.
Well, it's modem play. I think just network infrastructure and that, once again, that's another whole reason why 10 gig never has become a standard. Is that the standards that people look at? So they look at Wi-Fi because everything's connected via Wi-Fi these days. How many devices in your home? And think about this right now. If you're not you or me, Chris, or you might potentially. I don't know how many machines you like to have at home and how you connect them up, like gaming and non-gaming and just general. I'll be honest. I usually have 2 or 3 things direct connected copper, sometimes 4, if I have like my PlayStation or something like that, direct connected. The rest of everything that you use, laptops,
tablets,
phones, TVs, Internet of things, all that stuff, all that's done over Wi-Fi.
It is.
And so, realistically, which we're just going to tie back into the next point that I have. So, switches are the expensive thing, you would think. But if all you have is 5, 10 devices that need copper or that need an actual network connection, those switches are coming down in price, getting fairly close to what 16-port Ethernet switches and 24-port and 48 ports were, a few years ago. And like I said, if all you need is five ports right there, that's enough. And $100 for a 10 gig switch, if you got AT&T fiber, is I don't understand why you wouldn't want to make that jump. But so we've gotten to the 6E conversation. That's why 2.5 and 5 gig got developed. What's funny is, Chris, you talk about having. So my router never stopped working, Chris. People also forget this too, and this is another major perk to 6E as well. It's beamforming.
Yep.
And auto sensing other signals as well, because if you live in apartment complexes like people do now, 6 and 6E, 6E, the lack of network noise that I deal with now versus what I used to have, and you can't see it.
The beamforming's been around for a while, though. They had beamforming on Wi-Fi 5, right? Because I don't think it was as accessible or as expensive. I know they had it in more expensive access points.
Yes, they did.
Beamforming is basically, so you put an access point up in your room, and it does a circumference around with Wi-Fi signal. Well, beamforming, what the access point does is it looks and sees where the devices are, and then takes most of the signal and projects it towards where the devices are.
Oh.
Right, so you can get more concentrated and a little bit longer range, more density in a single spot if you have a lot of devices in that one spot, right? So Ruckus, you ever heard of Ruckus Wireless? They were one of the guys who pioneered this, and they started doing it 15 years ago. But you used to be able to deploy a Ruckus access point, one of them, and it would normally, if it was any other access point, you'd need 3 of them, right? Like that from beamforming, right? And it's amazing technology.
But it became part of the standard with Wi-Fi 6 and 6E.
It did.
And
it did.
Yet routers implemented it in Wi-Fi 5 a lot, which to me was AC. So I can't get over calling it that. But that was the thing though. So going back to Wi-Fi 5, and Wi-Fi 5 is what kind of dictated out that they needed this new standard of Ethernet, and needed to up the standard, but they didn't need 10 gig. And the reason for it was Wi-Fi 5 or Wi-Fi AC was 3,200 megahertz or 3,200 megabit, up to 3,200 megabit over multi MIMU transmissions. So what we're talking about here is when you get to that level of, and I want to see the exact number so I can call it out. So somebody likes to watch this and might comment, well, oh yeah, he said it was that. No, it wasn't that.
Get the number wrong.
I get the number wrong. I'm almost positive it was 3,200 because I almost always had like the highest bandwidth router I could find. Like I said, I'm a nerd when it comes to stupid things.
What kind of routing?
So right now I have a Netgear Orbi mesh system.
Okay. Yep.
The 6E.
Yep.
And actually, I'll tell you a fun story about that here in just a minute. But it is impressive. One, it has a 10 gig uplink, or WAN port, I should say, and it's got a 2.5 gig shared port.
Yeah. On
it, and then it's got 3 1 gigs on it on each node. So each node has a 2.5 gig switch port, and then and then 3 1 gigs on it as well. But the 2.5 gig doesn't have to be an uplink. It can be a downlink too if you want to use it that way.
So this is kind of an aside, but what's become of the octopus looking 8 antenna things from Asus, like the super gamer style, spider looking things?
Yeah, I never had one of those or installed one of those, so I don't know. I'm sure they're still around. I mean, Asus still makes decent networking equipment.
Mm-hmm.
But we do a lot of the Netgear Orbis. I'm with Brad. We go into a home, we're going to do the Netgear Orbis. We found those in TP-Link. TP-Link makes a decent one.
Mm-hmm.
We found the Netgear Orbis are the best, and then for businesses, we use Ubiquiti, right? But there's a lot of different. There's a lot of good products and there's a lot of bad products, but I don't know that much about the Asus one.
I'll pull it up and show you. So you guys can see here.
It looks pretty cool.
I mean, they looked really cool back in the day, but it was more of a.
I don't know if you need 8 antennas.
Well, but the thing was, the more antennas you have, Chris, even back then, the better you could separate channels out, and so the more devices you could end up bringing in.
Yeah.
What is security Wi-Fi networking?
I think it was a Nighthawk. It was
no, it was the ROG ones. You're talking about the Asus ROG one, I think.
Yeah.
My apologies.
The Nighthawk. Now the Nighthawk had some big, beefy, fat ones. But
the Asus.
Asus is the one that I remember. That the Orbeez, these Orbeez though, they're freaking sweet.
The one that has like 8 antennas on it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I know the ones you're talking about.
Let's see if I can find
It looks like a big spider.
Yeah.
Looks like an upside down spider. Exactly right.
There it is.
Where?
Hold on. There's about
you're
a
probably
10-second lag.
I won't say a 10
yeah.
second, but there's definitely a lag.
Yeah, there it is.
Those suckers. I mean, but even those were AXE. So technically, those were Wi-Fi 6. And now actually that's a Wi-Fi 6E above it. The top one there, the one that's $500, that's a Wi-Fi 6 router.
So I would imagine, I don't know networking gear at all. I would imagine that so the Orbi doesn't look like that.
No, the Orbeez got internal antennas.
Okay, so then why would you have external antennas?
You know this.
It's the age-old discussion. Why doesn't your cell phone have them anymore?
Yeah, because they companies feel like they're going to get better reception and better transmission through it, and other companies are like that. Orbeez got the antennas internally, right? It's just covered up with a shield. I guess so you can, like those antennas, you can position them and point them. I don't know. I don't know if you actually get any better reception from it versus not. You did?
I can speak to it. You did, especially so where that was beneficial prior to Wi-Fi 6 and 6E was if you were in like an apartment complex and you had 2 floors, like you had a townhome that had 2 floors or something like that, and you know so the old router I had 4 antennas on it. So I'd leave 2 pointing straight up, and then I'd lay 2 straight back, so that I could send signal upstairs pretty easily.
Got it.
Because back then you didn't have beam, like the router didn't have beamforming in it, but the antenna signal comes off. Essentially, you leave a slight dead spot directly above the antenna. It's not massive, but there's just like anything else with anything else. When there's noise or interference some way from 9,000 other routers being right around you that are all trying to produce in the same wireless transmission space, it kind of affects you.
Is that $1,500?
Don't blame me. That's what I bought.
Yeah, those Orbeez get expensive.
Wow.
Yeah.
But they're fast as crap.
If you're buying the newest, best ones, you're going to spend $1,500. But that thing probably does like 5,000 square feet, right? I can't read it, but I'm sure it's got some crazy square footage on it.
This is where I'm going to get to the fun story for you. So, Chris, you've been down here. You remember that apartment that was on the ground floor right near where you parked?
Yeah.
I think I kind of pointed this out. So, I have 2. In my apartment, I only really use 2 nodes. I have the third because that's the pack that they sold. They didn't sell a 2-pack, even from the website. So I only have the 1-pack setup or the 3-pack setup. So I got all 3, but I did it because I wanted to have the third node so that I had a friend of mine that lived down in that bottom apartment from me, which had to go outside and then back into their apartment, and that was probably, I want to say, I'm giving a rough guess, 100 feet away, maybe 75.
Yeah.
But not a short distance. All right. So these things are able to transmit, and I actually can get uplink, downlink over Wi-Fi 6E on my cell phone. I can actually see the full internet speed that I pay for, which is about 960 to 980 down. You know, that question that he was saying, like, and that's pretty much sitting anywhere in the house because, like I said, I have a 1,300 square foot apartment. One's on one floor, one's on the other. And the whole purpose of that was just to do exactly like we just been talking about, basically to allow so that I don't have each floor gets a directional band. And even Netgear and others will tell you, you know, if you've got multiple floors, one router is always, with the mesh systems these days, you put one on one floor, one on the other. Yep. And try to centralize them as much as possible. Or split them out, you know, catty corner. Don't go to the opposite ends of the home, but go, you know, and split them that way. I actually read this setup stuff. Now mine are wired together, so they have 2.5 gig to each other. But,
yeah, that's the best way to do it, and that's why you're getting that speed that you are.
Exactly.
Yeah. But if they were backhauling over the Wi-Fi, you wouldn't get that speed.
So here's the fun thing, though. That 75 feet away that I put the third node on that specific $1,500 model. Set the node, and I got a discount because when I got them, I had like a bunch of credits. I didn't pay that exact amount. I paid probably $13 or something like that. But so that 75 feet away, that one node covered their entire apartment, which was one floor. And to my network was, obviously, I was getting 300 down and 300 megabit, 300 megabit down, 300 megabit up over a Wi-Fi connection between the two. I was extremely impressed. Far more than I thought it would be. Now, the one downside that people don't recognize or realize is it's not like you can connect one to one and then to the other one. They both have to connect back to the base station or to the main router.
I think you can go one hop. Can't you go one hop with those? It used to be that you could have.
If they're wired. If they're wired, you can. You can't if they're not wired. That's the one downside I thought. Because I mean, mine wouldn't let me do it though. It had to see back to the main one.
It had to see back to the main one. All right, so the TP link will let you go one hop out.
Now,
right?
like I said,
but you drastically lose your throughput on that second hop, right?
Yes.
So that's the issue with it. Yeah, because we've done that before where we'll have like a main one, and then you put one over Wi-Fi, and then you can go a third one out, right? And they'll connect back from each other. But like, you know, you're getting 20 megs a second when you're the third hop out, right? Like you're drastically losing throughput.
Yeah, it's not worth it. Not worth the time.
It's not worth this time. You're better hardwiring them in.
And if you've got a home that big, I would hope that you. And so here's where we're going to go back to the other standards in the conversation. So the other neat piece that multi-gig brought was multi-gig over Cat5e. So all along, we always thought the standard was, okay, 100 meters, you get a gigabit and you're done. Well, actually, you can get 100 meters, you can get 5 gigabit over Cat5e. Well, there'll be a little bit of losses, but I know you can get at 75 meters out because I've tested it before. I know you can get at 75 meters, you can get 5 gigabit to work. I've never made a 100-meter cable. I don't know anything that's 100 meters from me that I want to connect to. So, but the point that I make in that situation is that, like, I mean, so you can go a substantial hop. And so what makes Wi-Fi 6, you know, and 6E so unique is that they're working on that 6 gigahertz band. You know, we're in that unlicensed spectrum space again that's above 5 gigahertz that really, you know, and same thing, you know, eventually I feel like we're going to have some communication crosstalk with 5G and other devices in that space because everybody likes unlicensed space. But as a whole, I mean, I don't know, it just seems kind of comical to me. But Cat 6 itself will only give you 10 gig at, I think it's 100 feet. Right? Do you think it's 100 feet for Cat 6? Cat 6A is what you need for the full 100 meters.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But should probably change back to the other camera.
Oh yeah, I should. Well, I will. Yeah. Thank you for telling me, Chris. See, if you'd have set it up and done yours, you could have been the one clicking. But so the comical thing is, obviously, home networks may never. If we keep getting up in internet speeds, you're going to have to eventually get better and better cabling. So you're going to get at least multi-gigabit routers, multi-gigabit switches coming out more and more often now. And as a matter of fact, if you've done any research on it recently, we really are starting to see a lot of multi-gigabit switches, 2.5 gigs and 5 gigs every now and then. I think the reason I think everybody's going 2.5 gig is because that's what Intel's producing as part of their standard with the when Alder Lake came out. So
Z690, yeah.
Well, no, it wasn't Z690. It was Alder Lake. Alder Lake.
Oh, it was the processor itself.
The processor itself, when they launched it, they said, as part of this new processor, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to say, look, the standards changed. Because we're building Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E, wireless into a lot of these motherboards. We need to go ahead and say, and the thing is, what's good for 2.5 gig? All right, what do you need faster than gigabit internet for? Internet or intranet for? It's when you're doing a lot of file transfers. Well, the reason I think a lot of this stuff came about was during the pandemic. Everybody was like, all right, we're all at home now. We got to move files around and do things on different computers and so on and so forth. We're all at the house. Moving things around at home, you kind of want some faster speeds finally.
Yeah.
And I think everybody kind of noticed, okay, if I'm moving a 5 gig movie, 5 gig Blu-ray movie that I've downloaded from something to something else, you need the bandwidth, or you're going to sit there and wait, 30 minutes to move it.
Yeah.
And nobody wanted to do that, or 20 minutes to move it. So we finally got to the point where the consumer side demanded it. Obviously, in the workplace, things are a little different. We have network servers all over small and medium businesses that are in. Most of the people that have those file servers, file shares internally, their reason for upgrading to a multi-gig network is usually the type of work they do, what kind of files they have to transfer, kind of deal. Obviously, in my workplace, that's Chris kind of knows how things are for me. I use 10 gig for a reason, because I move files between machines at 10 gig speeds on a regular basis.
Yeah, once you start putting in a lot of SSDs and really the high speed ones into computers, and then you're trying to talk, between the computers, you're just going to outstrip your cable. It's not going to go fast enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because on the server networking side, like 10 gigs been around for a while, right? And like I remember doing 10 gig uplinks from the server to the switch to a storage array, but it's never like I've never done it to like a PC. Like I've never been in a small business, right? I'm sure larger enterprise businesses they do that, but for like a small business, I haven't run into anybody wanting 10 gig or needing 10 gig.
Sometimes
now, right? But I'm sure that's going to change.
Sometimes what post-production houses do, they've got all their computers for editing, and you're editing kind of like the Pixie Boot.
Right.
You're editing off the server.
Right.
So all the local machines have to have 10 gig back to the host, because otherwise those little 1 gig cables are not going to handle it.
I know.
Well,
I know.
And think about drive technology in general. So everyone would have thought, well, say to SSDs, they're multi-gig speeds, and if you rate a couple of those together, you get multi-gig speeds. I think the bigger thing in that picture is, and Chris, I think I've told you this 1,000 times. So Mike, you're going to hear this for the first time. It's going to make you laugh. There aren't a whole lot of applications out there that can see faster than a couple hundred megabytes a second.
Yeah.
And really and truly need more than a couple hundred megabytes a second. So if you've got a 10 gig network where you've got a full gigabyte a second of bandwidth, then you physically can. you can almost completely work remote on a server setup that way, where you've got the file server back on one location, and then you're working on the files on a local machine. But physically, you can reduce the amount of costs that the business has by making that upfront, I would call it upfront cost, but realistically, depending on the number of machines that they end up having, it actually gets to the point where it's actually a cost savings, because then you're putting cheaper actual drives to store the programs on. You don't need a lot of local storage.
Right. I was doing a quote a long time ago, back in 2019. Well, that's a long time ago.
Feels like
and it was like the boot drives. I mean, the boot drives were like 250 to 500 gig SSDs. And then I think the work drives may have still only been 250 to 500 gigs, because they wanted to force the editors to use the server, mainly from a data security and access standpoint, because if it's stored on your local machine, Billy Bob can't get to it because it's on your local machine. And as you know, if you're not having to buy a 4 terabyte SSD for every single computer, that's actual money saved.
Yeah, it's a lot of money saved.
So, and I'll give you an industry that's kind of starting to take off, but the VDC, design engineering firms and reality capture are all, they're really trying to take off. But one, the amount of data files that some of these companies have, and
obscene.
I'll raise my hand in that situation too, myself personally. The amount of data, the size of the data files that we have that I transmit and move around. I mean, we're talking, they're bigger than a thumb drive. They're bigger than your standard, 64, 128, sometimes even 256 gig thumb drive. And if that's the size of the file, and also I tend to remind people of this, it's not just that even when you're moving a smaller file over 10 gig, or not a smaller file, a bunch of tiny files that add up to something massive, you're still moving them faster as a whole, because that 10 gig NIC is giving you an overall higher bandwidth. So you're basically letting the CPU go wild at that point to move the files. And you're limited by how fast your CPU can move them. Because you might sit there and go, oh man, I'm moving at 2 megabytes a second. But if you go down to a 1 gig NIC, you're going down to like 128 kilobytes a second sometimes. Because you're throttled there. Now, that's a unique use case, obviously, in my situation. But yeah, like the whole, and I think also the network technologies that kind of changed it. How many failover systems do you have to put in for a small business? Or have you ever done like having like dual networks?
A couple. I mean, in this business, I do a lot of small businesses, so not a lot. A couple. In a previous business I owned, we did it a lot. Right, we would do multiple firewalls, multiple switches, right, that had redundancy, like hot or hot cold, that type of stuff. So they would fail over. Yep. Small businesses, a lot of small businesses don't want to pay for that, unfortunately.
That makes
sense.
I
got to be honest. Networking equipment, it rarely fails, man. Like I can't remember the last time I went out and a switch failed or a router failed. Like it just doesn't have. I mean, unless you buy something really cheap, like the no name brand from China or something like that, right? But like we just don't go out and replace that gear. It just doesn't break.
That's a good point. And see, that's the thing. Another way to look at this is another reason people don't haven't moved to 10 gig Ethernet as a whole that's probably single-handedly, if not the largest, one of the largest reasons. They've got solid gigabit infrastructure. Why are they going to replace it if it ain't breaking? If it ain't broke, don't fix it sometimes,
Yeah, and I think I think there's two other reasons driving it. I think the other reason is I think Wi-Fi technology is advancing so rapidly that we're getting the speeds that most small businesses need over Wi-Fi, right? Like that, most small businesses aren't going to need 10 gig to the end user, and Wi-Fi is advancing so quickly that I think we're going to go there. The other thing that's starting to come around, and like from an IT a person who's been in IT selling it, VDI is starting to come around, virtual desktop. And a lot of businesses and small businesses are starting to move towards virtual desktop with like Microsoft Azure in the cloud or Google in the cloud, right?
Yep.
And they're going to doing all their compute in the cloud. Their servers are going to be in the cloud, and that transfer is going to be all done up there instead of local.
Yep. And
I think
that's a huge point, because once you get to that point, you've got to have the bandwidth available to make sure that you're not losing stream in the middle of an actual session or something like that.
Right. Right.
It's a crazy point. You know, I think that the standards haven't really changed so much, but so I did do a poll, and I want to kind of say there ain't a whole lot of responses to it. That's okay. But I'll put it up on the screen so everybody, there's enough to be worthwhile. But it'll also make you kind of think about it, which is, all right. So there's only at this point 14 votes, but it's kind of.
Up on my phone.
I'll zoom in.
I can go to your page on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you can. It's actually kind of more balanced than I thought it would be. Because I like I said, I try to look at it from the, I don't really like. There are not many people that are me. They don't need above gigabit at home. I'm a goofball, but to see that with 14 people voting, a couple of them are on multi-gig. Most of them are on 10 gig already or fiber of that kind of variety.
Wait, this is yeah.
That's a different poll, right?
I did two different polls.
Oh.
Yeah, the one we're looking at's got
different
post
result.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, this is all even.
Yeah, I've got it.
Oh, okay. Found it.
Yeah. I mean,
it kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Since multi-gig's fairly new, Gigabit's been around, and although I got to be honest, I wouldn't have expected 10 gig to be at 36%.
That's kind of what I was getting at.
Why would you do? I mean, I guess why would a small business do above 10 gig? I mean, that's really.
You're running a server.
Are we talking about like 10 gig WAN or 10 gig in like an internal network?
Internal. All this is internal.
So there's 40 gig,
there's 100 gig, there's 200 gig, there's 400 gig.
Yeah, I've never seen those. I've seen 40 gig. So the only time I've ever seen it is if you have a SAN, a storage area network, where you have
like the Pixie boot.
Yeah, but except you have multiple servers, like 15 virtual servers or 15 physical servers running a bunch of virtual servers that are all using that SAN for hard drives, and then you're connected from the servers to the storage area at 40 gig or 100 gig. Like that's the only time I've ever seen that. But I'm sure when you get into bigger enterprises, they have huge storage arrays that all those servers are pulling from, and that's where you get into that 100 gig.
Yeah, that's how my company's set up. We have a lot of those.
Yeah, and then they have like these Cisco switches that are $20,000 each that are 40 gig that are connecting the whole thing up, and that's where you get into a lot of that redundancy, right? You have redundant switches, so if one fails, that kind of stuff.
And you're pulling in that 40 or that 100 or that 200, whatever you're pulling in.
Yeah.
You're pulling that in, and then as you pull that in, it breaks out usually to something else.
Right.
At the local machine. Most local machines, and there are a lot of server hardware for medium to enterprise businesses, medium to large enterprises. Most of those servers are going to have 10 gig as the standard, if not 40 gig. It's going to be an add-on, Bluefield DPU that's going to have like 200 gig or something like that, or above, or 100 gig.
Yeah, I've never seen that. I've only seen 40 gig.
I think NVIDIA is working on a 800 gig.
Yep.
I thought. Yeah, I saw that in some. That's really. I mean, that's really for their AI, like multi.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is the purpose of that? So it's where we're going with that is that's CXL based cards, right? So I don't know how much you
Camera switch.
I did. I was doing it as you were talking. The CXL is going to be one of those things where it's got a lot of potential to do a lot of things. I don't know, Mike, if you've seen the CXL standards, but basically it starts with PCI Express 5.0. So you take your PCI Express 5.0 bus, and then you have opportunities to do things with that. One of them is storage over storage over fabric. So basically, you've got a storage server that multiple machines pull from directly, like that, and basically that server is. And when I say, think of it like this: the amount of data you store, memory you store, all those kind of different things, all those resources, you pool them over CXL. And so your actual physical servers, the amount of memory and the amount of storage per core, the way you want to increase that density is put it all in one giant machine, and then let the fabric, which is 400 to 800 gigabit per second, be the method of transfer to the actual machine. So you're
talking like hyper-converged infrastructure, that kind of stuff? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
So that's where that makes sense, and that's where those that's going to be like research level colleges, those kind of major corporations that are doing something crazy with that kind of stuff. That is not a technology that will come to any of us, because none of us need that kind of speed to play Call of Duty.
No. It's funny because there's actually I can't remember the name of the company, but they're based here in Raleigh that does. Like they're pioneers some of that hyper-converged infrastructure. God, I can't remember the name of it. But that's what they do, is that stuff. It's really interesting stuff. The way that you're familiar with hyper-converged infrastructure.
I've heard the name, but I don't really know.
I can't explain it really well, Brad. Maybe you can, but it's basically instead of having like a server that has memory, CPU, storage, graphics, it basically you can build a server to do one of those two things, and as you need compute power, you just add another server for either processing or memory or storage, right? So instead of having or network, you can even have a hyperconverged server that has network. So it's just basically it's almost like the Blade concept, but instead of having specifically designed servers, you're just adding whatever piece you need to the array. It's like almost a building, be able to building block servers on top of each other.
It's like how you'll have a file server and then a GPU server and then
quite literally. That's the best way that I like to explain it is each individual. Think of like a rack server, right? Yeah. And it's got nodes there. So one node is all of your storage. Right? Yeah. So one 2U or 4U server is just storage.
And a processor.
Yep, and a processor. The next rack down is all, and a small processor, because you don't need a big processor for that. And you can basically price your machines that you need to be, because like I said, everything's done over the CXL fabric. And like memory pooling, for example, you can make a singular machine that has, terabytes on terabytes of memory in CXL. And then it can share that memory out through, because obviously, when you think of memory on a CPU, you got to think about it in layers. So you got level 1, level 2, level 3 cache, and then you got DRAM. Well, where Optane existed was between DRAM and storage. That's where it was supposed to exist. Well, the biggest reason Optane disappeared was because basically with CXL, you've gotten to the bandwidth point of time where you don't need to put these things into a DIMM. You can put and be hyper close to the CPU to affect that change. You can actually go out and place it in the PCI Express lane or fabric over PCI Express in this case too. You can utilize that channel that way and populate all of your memory channels with actual DRAM. And then you've got DRAM chips that are sitting, DRAM chips that are, so you're still paying for DRAM, but you could also populate it in a ton of these populated slots and then once again, small CPU to power that node. But
Yeah.
when you get outside of the, 512 memory you've got on the board, rather than going to storage, which is much, much slower, and I don't care who you are, how you operate it, if your cache drives, unless you've got some kind of an Optane cache drive, like geniuses and dumbasses, whatever they're called, like myself, yeah, I'm both. But unless you've got an Optane drive, an actual Optane storage drive that's going to have the IOPS that you need from that perspective, not the bandwidth, the IOPS. When you get to that point, you want to go to another DRAM module so you can go out in a storage-like speed, but go to the IOPS that you need on another whole node in that rack. It's just those things. And then you've got the same thing like you were just talking about as well. So you'd have a compute module, okay, that's just, a 4-socket CPU, 4-socket board that's just compute cores for this. And all of it stacks together, and what does it make? One massive VDI box.
Yeah.
So one massive virtual desktop machine that can power, that's got hundreds and hundreds of cores, the right amount of memory, and while it's a little bit slower to them to a degree, I mean, from what I understand in the research that I've done on CXL, the actual loss in speed using CXL memory versus using DRAM itself over a VDI interface, it's very negligible. Like it's a little slower. So you might give each VDI 4 gigs of physical DRAM, but to give them 16 gigs of actual RAM, they get 12 gigs out of the VDI box.
Yeah.
Out of the other box. They're not going to really notice that on the other box because everything's happening out over a network. What's the network infrastructure to begin with? They're working on it. And most of these VDI boxes in general, what are they running? Your standard Microsoft suite of apps, Excel, those kind of things. You're not running Crisis on it, for lack of a better word. But a hyper-converged network is that kind of thing. And then you also have like your visual compute stack on the top or something like that. The switches and the network stuff for that, all of it's done basically in the same rack. You're not really looking to do that over the entire network. The tie-in to those is usually like, you might have a 100 gig NIC there for tie-in because you're going to have 100 machines attached to it, 100 VDIs, which would make sense. And then each machine's getting a gigabit of that bandwidth. But that's realistically, that's all the incoming traffic to that switch is not going to be, you're not going to have incoming traffic that's 200 gigabit that switch. You're going to have a bunch of incoming 1 gig NICs. And then it translates into a switch that has all those 1 gig NICs and then drops out to 200 gig or whatnot. It's crazy, but it's the future of cluster computing inside of a lot of companies, large enterprises, because from a cybersecurity perspective, the less access to the physical machine you give people, I think the happier a lot of IT cybersecurity folks are. I mean, I kind of wonder, with Wi-Fi, and see, that's always been the question I have too, and I'll ask it because I'm curious. From a Wi-Fi perspective, I mean, how often is it that, I don't really know that many people, but how often is it that somebody's able to go in and break encryption on Wi-Fi? I don't think I've ever heard of like a major case of that, unless they know the actual Wi-Fi password, obviously. But I don't really know of a method for Wi-Fi is in itself is so secure to begin with. You're not hacking a bunch of machines over Wi-Fi. Because you're not, you've got to have the password to get into it. Unless you're doing like over an open network, which obviously everyone hates. That's kind of my thought process there. But
with the new, what is it, WPA3 or 2 or whatever it is, I don't know the standards, but I've never heard of that happening recently.
So everything going on in the movies about them like going in the network and hacking it.
So this is what does happen. This I know. I've actually had this happen, not to me, but to somebody. Like I've had people go to like a Starbucks or know people go to like a coffee shop and they see a wireless network and they just jump on some wireless network, not knowing what the wireless network is, and like get their shit stolen or something like that. But they're joining some public open network. But I'm with Brad. Like, if you're on a secure network, I don't know how you like the encryption's so good nowadays. I don't know how people are breaking that. I mean, maybe the CIA and covert. Maybe they have some way of doing it, but I don't know. Like maybe Mossad's doing it.
I mean, you got to think it's got to take one of these hyper converged servers we're talking about. Is what it would take to probably break some of that encryption.
Yeah,
I mean, and nobody's spending that hundreds of thousands of dollars just to go hack a couple Wi-Fi routers.
No, and to go steal grandma's, Visa card, and clean her $1,500 out. I mean, it's just not worth it.
And also the other factor to that thought that I just had is you've got to be able to take that rack and it's got to be mobile. I mean, it can't sit in an office somewhere, right?
No, it's got to be in the back of the black van.
Yeah.
With the generators going. Right.
The back of my my mobile internet van, as I like to call it.
Yeah, that's like Mission Impossible stuff. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, the way this is just it's a fun conversation to think about. But like, okay, so we'll pose it to another network technology and bring it this way. How many people are you actually installing that have those? Do you actually get into some small businesses that have like multiple floors or multiple, a large office where you're running a fiber backplane? So you're running SFP from one to another, whether it's SFP plus or
not. From like one switch to another?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do that occasionally. Not a lot, but we do it a little bit. We do it for the esports, right? Because he's running 40 computers. So we're running like a 10 gig switch that we're connecting to a router, 10 gig up to the other switches, right? But everything else is out as 1 gig.
Yeah.
But occasionally, but not very often.
And it's funny to think, but I kind of was pondering this. I guess we've been talking about how Wi-Fi has kind of taken over, and it really has. I think the biggest reason for that, though. So what's the one reason any nerd, any IT person, any person like the three of us sitting here, what's the main reason you always hear that you want to wire up? Usually, especially gamers, it's because it's low latency.
Yeah, latency.
But I've been sitting here thinking about it myself. Like, I don't know that. I think Wi-Fi 6 is, if it's not on par or better than like cellular latency to begin with. Cellular latency's come down a lot in the recent past with 5G. But if your latency over Wi-Fi is just as good, I mean, I wonder. I guess my thought process here is I wonder how soon it will be that we'll actually, you get a 10 gig. Your NIC on your Ethernet port is either 5 gig, 2.5 gig, 10 gig, or nothing, because Wi-Fi is just already faster.
Yeah, I mean that's my question, right? Like you go buy a MacBook Air or MacBook Pro. There's no LAN. There's no LAN on it.
No.
And you go buy a lot of new laptops don't have LAN ports on it, right? Like so everything's Wi-Fi. And I don't know what the statistic is, but I would imagine there's more laptops sold than desktops.
I would.
I don't know. I don't know.
I think that's I think it's a yes and no answer to that one. I think sometimes that's the case, but I think it depends on I think at home, you probably mixed bag, especially since prior to the pandemic, I would have agreed. Nothing but laptops. Yeah,
you're right. There's a lot of businesses that are buying desktops, right? If you put all that into the mix, most businesses have desktops. They're not buying laptops.
Although we started defaulting to motherboards with Wi-Fi on them back in middle 2019. We just defaulted to motherboards with Wi-Fi because I was tired of people saying
that there's no Wi-Fi.
I don't have an Ethernet jack in my office. It's got to connect to Wi-Fi, and I'm like, Just go to Best Buy. It's like $5, and so we just defaulted to Wi-Fi. So I don't know how many. I think laptops might be more prevalent.
Workstation laptops especially. But so here's where this conversation spurred from. All right. So I hold in hand a lovely Dell Precision 7770. All right. Newest thing off the line. A shiny chunk of processing goodness. All right. Top of the line spec, what you can get in it, awesome. It's got an Ethernet jack on it, even. One of those little compressed ones, you know? It's got the little tweaker thing. 1 gig. You buy a top of the line laptop, you kind of would expect them to put top of the line things in it. And that's been, of all the things on that laptop, that's probably my only one. I mean.
So here's another question for you. Do you think we will see computers, laptops, devices that only have wireless cell service on them? Will Wi-Fi go away eventually for consumer goods? I don't think it'll ever go away for businesses because of the security purposes and the control. But for consumer goods, like in the next 20 years, are we not going to have a Wi-Fi network? Or all of our devices are just going to connect to 6G?
I would say, I'll say no for a reason. No with a caveat. It depends on the capacity, and because see, here's the other thing about 5G is, so when you deploy 5G and you want that, so normal 5G, if you look at your phone and it just says 5G on it, that's basically LTE on steroids. It's carrier aggregated to the nth degree LTE. And that's all the technology is. So you can get that. So basically what that means is it's taking multi-band LTE and aggregating it just like multi-band Wi-Fi is. You know, how you can get fast speeds on Wi-Fi. And so that is still substantially slower than like the ultra wideband or the UC or 5G plus that AT&T has. You know, I can't remember, Ultra Connect, I believe is what T-Mobile's is. And so, regular standard nationwide 5G or whatever you want to call it, the range of it is, the biggest problem with LTE and all that other stuff was capacity. And so the reason I don't think it would take off that much is I think if you get rid of Wi-Fi from the home, Wi-Fi at your house, what you run into is you're now at millions of devices that now only have a connection, millions and millions of devices at that only have a connection to LTE or to a backplane network, that's the lowest tier of that, but to your 5G network. I don't think that there's, obviously as you build out the 5G networks, you have, because of the inherent nature of the wavelength, you have to put more nodes in more places because it doesn't travel as far. But imagine a laptop that somebody had living out in the sticks of Idaho, where they've got AT&T DSL still at 10 meg up down, and they have no other internet access other than maybe satellite. You can't just drop them down to you can't take Wi-Fi away from them, and I don't think that we have the technology deployable to truly, completely cover and landmass that. That's why I think you'll always have some kind of Wi-Fi radio in laptops. Could I see us dropping them from cell phones? Sure. Tablets? Maybe. Depends. And matter of fact, I bought my first iPad recently that actually had cellular, and I thought that was hilarious because I'm like, I'm not going to, and I tell myself the same thing all the time. I'm never going to use this thing off Wi-Fi, and then I find myself constantly doing it.
Yeah, I know. I have the same thing. And then I look at how much data I use, and I'm like, damn it, I used like 10 gigs this month.
I'm so glad that I'm on Wi-Fi most of the time, because I sparingly use my data, but Wi-Fi is like 40 gigs. I'm like, oh boy, thank God we're on the free Wi-Fi.
It's crazy. And that's the other thing too with this 5 gig, you use data so much thinking quicker.
Oh,
for whatever
yeah.
reason.
It's so much faster.
I know.
But,
But you would think, okay, I'm still doing the same stuff, so you would think it would just take longer. But I'm using data so much quicker over 5G.
Well, possibly the
better
faster
quality.
connection.
Yeah, right. You're
yeah,
getting higher quality
the-
video, higher
the-
quality stuff, right?
the faster connection allows you to do stuff that you wouldn't be able to do before because
Right.
it was terrible, and
Now you can do it.
now you're
I know.
yeah
It drives you to do it too. You don't think twice about it. You just do it
because it's
because
faster. So
Yeah.
No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
and because I mean the point that you made earlier. I mean, have either of you guys actually ever been to? I don't know what carriers you have. I have Verizon, so I'll give my example. Verizon's ultra wideband that's based on millimeter wave. Have you guys ever seen or sat around and seen or used the millimeter wave technology yet?
No.
So it's especially prevalent in like professional stadiums, but you know a lot of the bigger cities, and when I say a lot of the bigger cities, I mean I reference this. Greenville, South Carolina has it. You know, it's not in bigger, huge cities, but it's not just in huge cities, but outside on the street, almost 3,000 megabit per second down, and 120, 200 megabit per second up. Like that to me is crazy.
Wow. Over with cellular?
Over cellular.
Holy. No, I'm not getting that at my house.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, so millimeter wave, the technology in and of itself, though, from a networking standpoint of view, it's you have to think about millimeter wave like I think about radiation from working in the nuclear industry as much as I have. So millimeter wave is like a neutron particle, like a neutron radiation. It's just a little particle, but it's stopped by paper. If you put your hand in front of the antenna, you lose that actual millimeter wave signal. And so it's dramatic. It can dramatically slow down because of that. So that's why it's not right. I think you see a lot of the deployment use cases for millimeter wave currently have been high-speed internet connections for people in cities that have it. Like at home high-speed internet connections where they have a Wi-Fi 6 router that has that's their internet connection. Because like that's Verizon. If you haven't seen the commercials for Verizon's 5G Home yet, first and foremost, I have the 5G Home router. I use it. It's my backup network for my house. I've seen as fast as 850 megabytes a megabit per second down and 125 megabit per second up. Just sitting, and that's sitting inside the house now, not outside, inside the house. And then you go outside the house, or not outside the house, but then, obviously it's still not quite as good as copper in a downlink because you can't quite get gigabit from that perspective. But they're offering the service to people for $35 a month, $45 a month, and a $10 discount if you've got like the 5G service on your cell phone with them.
Not to go off topic here, but I'm pretty sure, I think it's Netgear that makes one of those Orbeez that you can put a SIM card in for that 5G service.
Yep, I know they do.
Is it the Orbeez that does that?
It is the Orbeez. I looked at it for a while. I mean, I'll be the first person to say the router that they give you, because I'm the kind of person where whenever I do something like that, I wire it into the actual network through a WAN port. So I have a multi-WAN router too, multi-WAN virtual machine router. What do you got? Not virtual machine. It's just a multi-WAN router, regardless. But the way those work. So it comes in now. I wire it in and disable the Wi-Fi on the router. Because I don't need the Wi-Fi. I don't need another Wi-Fi signal interfering with my already good Wi-Fi.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so that's what I do. But you could think of that just like any other thing. To me though, that's what's crazy is you've got those kind of technologies now that and see that's where I can see, if they've got 5G home and 4G home and whatnot like that, if companies have those kind of setups where you can get to that point, maybe there's a chance we could go away from Wi-Fi. But the other piece to that though is I think you really will get more along the lines of getting to that direction when ARM-based Windows PCs take off. And I don't know what you guys have seen on that, but
yeah, I have one. They're getting better.
I mean,
but in that scenario though, you're still going to have Wi-Fi because you're bringing in the 5G into their router, and their router's spitting out Wi-Fi, right? So you're still going to need Wi-Fi.
yeah, agreed. My thought was like when you have enough deployment for that to be enough, like for you to be able to utilize that nationwide. Right now, you still can't utilize that nationwide.
Yeah, right.
That's when you might be able to see that the laptops could drop Wi-Fi, because and then those home routers would go by the wayside. But
they would, right?
But my thought process goes back to the other thing is like it's. I think the reason I definitely could see cell phones dropping Wi-Fi in the future. One is you put a bigger battery in. You know, less radio space. You can put a bigger battery in. It's a radio that doesn't have. So one thing that kills me, I wish it was easier. Like, I wish I use an iPhone, so I'm this way, but I've used Android phones can work the same way. I wish there was a toggle switch, a better toggle switch for disabling Wi-Fi, not just turning it off temporarily. Because that's one of the things, you know, anytime you're broadcasting and looking for signal, what's it doing? It's eating battery. So all those different kind of methods where we can find ways to save battery, and then the always-on functionality of some of those ARM-based Windows PCs, and obviously now that Mac's on ARM, for lack of a better word, there's, you know, a much lower power draw, so you can have the battery life where it's like, all right, I don't need to shut this thing off. I just let it go. I'll just let the screen go black, lock the screen, whatever, close it down. It's not generating so much heat that when you put it in a backpack, it's going to roast. You know, so I could see getting rid of Wi-Fi in the situation when those things really can take over, and those devices could very easily go always on 5G signals and so on and so forth. I don't know, like heavy-duty laptops, desktops. I agree with you, Chris. There's a lot of people out there that are crazy that don't understand that sometimes it's just better to wire in, but at the same time, Wi-Fi it's advanced so much. I mean, heck, it's advanced so much in 10 years. How many did both of y'all actually have one of those old school Linksys black and blue routers? The WRT?
Oh yeah, I still got mine.
I do too. I still, yeah, same. I still have two of them. Oh my gosh.
The WRT 210s, right? Was that it, or the 510?
56G, I thought it was.
56G, yeah, you're right, 56.
Because it was the 56 megabit.
Router that I was using until the modem died, I paid $140 for a Netgear AC 1400.
Yep.
You want to hear a crazy story? I went into a customer today in downtown Cary who still has DSL.
Why? Why? Why?
I have no idea, man. No.
Limbo's like uppity place.
I have no idea. What's even worse is probably all he has to do is call Spectrum or whoever it is, and they'll probably be like, "Oh yeah, we can upgrade you to 300 meg for the same price." Yeah. Right? That's like all he's got to do.
Like DSL still. Why?
Like, free for 300 meg.
I didn't even know you could still get that in Cary.
Well, and I'll tell you, here's what's going to crack you up when I say this, but it's a true statement. What beats me to death is this. So Wi-Fi, so DSL is prominent in a lot more rural areas still, but I live in, and Chris has been here, so he's seen. So I live in a college community. I live in Thompson, South Carolina. And if you leave the apartment complex that I live in, right, and go out and about into the community, you can walk out the front gate of the apartment complex, and there are 3 communities within a stone's throw of that front gate that all have fiber 2 gig services to them now. Yes, 2 gig. The AT&T 2 gig fiber streams. But yet, if you want AT&T service in this apartment complex, it's still DSL. And it's not like an uppity decent DSL. It's still crap DSL.
Yeah, crap DSL.
Which, I mean, blows my mind. It's because I like that's the thing that kills me. Like, I mean, you like, there's fiber that runs under the ground right at the foot of the neighborhood. All you got to do is fiber to the home from the last mile, and I guarantee you, every person in this place would buy it because it's the AT&T brand.
It's got to be financial, right? The cost to run it, to all those, it's got to be something with they, I know like when Google runs it or they decide to run it, they go and get like a certain amount of people.
Yep.
That, right, to buy into it and then they run it. I wonder if AT&T is like, they look at the cost and they're like, hey, it's going to be too much money, not enough people interested. Who knows?
You would think that, but realistically, when you look at it from the perspective of, once again, I guarantee you every person that lived in here, if they knew it was an option, would go for it. One.
They probably would, right?
Two. Huh?
I had a really interesting conversation with a former Spectrum business rep. Now he's AT&T. Well, he was Spectrum Fiber business. Now he's AT&T Fiber business. But we talked for like 20 minutes at a networking event, which was a long time to talk about fiber and like how the territory maps for internet, like how it's so spotty and strange. It's modeled after the railroad territory map.
Yeah, so that's the other thing with some of them is that, like some towns have contracts with some of those providers to only be in certain parts of the town, right? So like, then that's why like you go to some towns and they only offer Spectrum or one or the other, right? I've seen that before.
And it's like last mile, and then it's like last mile, and then a bit of this, and then it's the backbone,
right?
And then you've got consumer and business and enterprise, and so that's like 9 different. It's a mess. It was an interesting conversation.
Well, and that's why I brought up the whole, it's a, I know there's fiber out on the street, and I know that people can sign up for it. It's literally a laziness of they don't want to invest the infrastructure themselves. But what cracks me up is all these places were built wired with Cat 5e automatically. So every port that you have, all the cabling, even phone line cabling was Cat 5e. So it's not like you couldn't pull that to the pole box and just pull the fiber line in that you need to pull into the pole box. You could very easily do that, or do a link and go to Ethernet at the wall outside, because none of both buildings don't have over 100-foot run there. So you could make a termination box right outside, run the link in over Cat 5e, and get your gigabit line into the house, and then just have the modem on the inside that they are connecting router on the inside. But like I said, they don't want to. It's an infrastructure thing for them because they don't want to go in and have to, I guess for lack of a better word, attach a puller machine and pull the fiber line through the actual pipe that they've got the existing copper line on. They don't want to take the time to do that because, like I said, it's already all pulled from the pole box. You just got to pull a new line down that wire string and just pull the wire out. But yeah, I mean, that's a crazy thing to think about to me. You mentioned something earlier, Mike, and I'm curious now. I got curious because you mentioned you guys deal a lot with Gigabit network stuff, and also Netgears, like home stuff. But are you seeing like a from an access point standpoint? That was another thing that came with some of the newer standards that associated with 10 gig now, and some of the 802.3 standards, is now you've got P over E, and you can still get gigabit on P over E. Power over Ethernet for most of P over E. But so a PoE switch can now run gigabit over them. Are you seeing more folks that are utilizing access points in small and medium businesses that are Wi-Fi 6 or 5E based, even 5 based, that have are run without having a power adapter?
That's all I run. We only do PoE. I mean, we've been doing that. PoE's been it's been around for a while. PoE Plus is fairly new, but we've been doing that a lot. We even do that in homes now, because so like if we go into a larger home and they want to put Wi-Fi in a larger home, we either do an Orbi or a TP-Link. But if something where they want dedicated access points, we'll run PoE access points. And the reason we do that is if we're going to put access points in the ceiling or a wall, it's cheaper to run Ethernet cable for PoE than it is to put an electrical outlet to put an access point, right?
Yep.
So it's less expensive, and it's cleaner. So we do that. We've been doing that a lot. And Ubiquiti actually has switches that you can run over PoE. Power the switch by PoE, right? So you can put a switch. If you have one port, and you need multiple ports, you can put a switch, 5-port switch that's actually powered by PoE, right? And they actually have access points now. And there's a lot of different companies that are doing this, but we'll do PoE pass-through. So like we can put an access point on a wall that's powered by PoE that'll actually pass through a LAN port that you can power another device, like a camera or something like that, right? So you can like daisy chain off of it. So yeah, the answer is we do a lot of that. It's definitely, I don't think, a lot of small businesses, I don't even think they understand what it is or how it works. They just know that it's less expensive and it looks cleaner.
Yeah, I mean, most access points I ever see are almost all PoE. It doesn't make sense to not do it.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, a lot of access points that used to come with power adapters no longer come with power adapters. They're just the access point that you're going to use. And if you want the power adapter, you got to pay extra for it.
It saves cost to them too, though. I guess. I mean, maybe they're saving you a buck by not. I doubt it, but
Yeah.
Well, I'll kind of wrap this up on this thought process. For that one, we appreciate you sitting down and talking with us, Mike. It's always fun to hear a new perspective on things. But I always like to poll it this way. With the industry that you work in and things that you like to look at, what do you think the next big thing is?
God. So I'm a Microsoft partner. We do a lot with Microsoft. And I know for a fact Microsoft is really pushing subscription-based virtual desktop. All right. So like their idea is that we pull the computing power out of the actual device and move it into the cloud, especially for businesses, right? And if you're familiar with Microsoft's Office 365 or Business 365, where you can buy apps and email, they're actually now starting to offer a subscription model where included is the virtual desktop.
Yep.
Right. So you're going to have a single sign-on for email, for applications, and for the virtual desktop. And from a small business standpoint, it makes the management of those desktops, security, deploying applications much easier. And I think it's finally here. I've being in IT for a while, I've heard about this forever. That it's coming. It's never been available because it's always been too expensive.
Yep.
We haven't had the bandwidth. Quite frankly, we haven't had the bandwidth, right, to do it. But now that we have the bandwidth and the prices come down, I think there's going to be a big shift over the next 10 to 15 years to that virtual desktop, especially for businesses. And I mean, we're already seeing some of that from a gaming standpoint, where they're starting to do a lot of these cloud applications for the games, right? We're running a lot of these games in the cloud now. So I can see that even from a gaming standpoint, starting to push some of that compute into the cloud.
I mean, the subscription model of everything kind of cracks me up. I mean, most people, I remember when you had your hardcore guys that all they wanted to do was pay for their license and pay, 10 times what you're paying a yearly subscription, which obviously after 10 years you're paying more, but 10 times what the yearly subscription was, and then pay a tenth of that price or quarter of that, or way less for the maintenance on it to keep upgrading and whatnot. And then they would just run on software and run on services and do that way, keep everything local. But I keep thinking to myself, that is you're 100% right. I mean, that's a good point to say that. I mean, the subscription model of hardware is, I don't want to say that the traditional computer will ever go away completely.
No.
Because I still think you're going to have some way to access that.
And but as apps and workloads get harder, the latency in the pipeline to the cloud.
Yeah, but if you're doing all of your computing in the cloud and all you're doing is basically an RDP session, right? And everything is being done there. That image, the projection of just the RDP is taking up very little bandwidth, right? So if you look at actually what it, you can, and think about this, I'm running my business in the cloud, right? And all of a sudden I need more compute power. I don't need to go out and buy a new computer. I just go on my Microsoft portal and add 8 more gigs of RAM, 10 more cores. And instead of paying $100 a month, I pay $150 a month. Like that's what Microsoft wants you to do.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think there's always going to be a need for that on-site computer for some applications and some instances. But I do think we're going to see a bigger push and a lot more companies doing VDI.
Well,
whether it's their own VDI or a subscription-based VDI.
And I would give the example of what do 75% of large business users do on their computer? They
Right,
get on
email.
they get on email, they get on Office products, yep. Word, Word, PowerPoint, Excel. They get on the internet, Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, and the final thing that they might do is they might do some light visualization and watching things. Watching YouTube videos, that kind of stuff. Watching movies, playing music on that machine, that kind of thing.
Right.
So realistically, from a compute perspective, to give you the example I love to use is so you have the standard example of what's the computer that everybody uses currently, and I mean, the most prominent thing, within the corporation that I work with on a daily basis is little crappy, what I call cheapo, thin like laptops and desktops that are tiny that don't have a whole lot of RAM, don't have a whole lot of storage, don't have a whole lot of anything like that. And the pure purpose for them is because 99%, 75% of the people that work on it, you sign a big contract to buy those once every 3 to 5 years. And that contract that you signed to buy them, I mean, we're talking like from that contract perspective, what you're looking at, you're looking at from my perspective, you're looking at it from, okay, what's the cheapest thing I can get that makes the most sense to guarantee that I'm good for the next 5 years? So you're not buying an i3 prospectively, but to this point, subscription based, your expectation is every so often they're going to be updating the standards for you. So those cheapo standards are automatically repetitively doing it. Now, ultra massive businesses with 10,000 plus employees, that could get kind of expensive. So Microsoft would have to look at that in some way, shape, or form. But I mean, heck, Chris, go back 5 years. What was the Intel standard? 4 cores, 8 threads.
7700K.
But even the i5s back then were 4 cores. Some of them were 4 cores, 4 threads. But I mean, to run those standard applications, you don't need a lot of horsepower.
No.
And as long as you're staying somewhat up to date with it, and making sure that there's enough compute for when Microsoft once again going to control their applications. So, that does make a lot of sense, especially to the enterprise, the small business that doesn't have a need that doesn't want to go out and buy all of their users, $800 laptop to last them 3 years, 4 years. And that's money you can save. And I think the one downside to that, because speaking back to the reason we do things the way we do things, is that's not something that you can capitalize. You can't capitalize that purchase and depreciate it. And so I guess the conversation that I would have is, because that becomes a charge that's based against the, like when you can, from a tax perspective, and this is, like I said, we're getting in the weeds a little bit here, but from a tax perspective, if you capitalize the costs of a purchase, you can depreciate that cost and then get the money back in taxes that you spend on that stuff over the amount of time that you utilize it. Now, if you went with that subscription model and service, you can't depreciate the product. So it's put into your base load that you have to spend every year. And I guess the point that I would wonder about is, what's the crossover point? If Microsoft can keep the costs to the point where, let's say you're spending $10 million, and use round numbers. Let's say you're spending $10 million every 5 years for all the machines, or for 75 to 80% of all the machines that everybody's using. right? So if you're spending that 10 million every every 5 years, using that number, that's, you got to make sure that that specific number of machines costs less than 2 million a year to justify.
Yeah, but you're going to directly take an expense off your operating. You're going to take the subscription as an operating expense every year, right? So you're not going to be able to depreciate the large amount, but every year or every month, you're going to take that expense that you're paying Microsoft as an expense to do business.
It would. Like I said, it would go into a different bucket.
It would go into a different bucket. Yeah, right. But those large corporations, like a company that's got 10,000 users, they're not going to pay Microsoft to host their VDI. They're going to do it internally on that hyper-converged infrastructure we talked about, right? And they're just going to pay the licensing fee to Microsoft. I mean, that's how they're going to do it.
Yeah, and that which gets once again gets the pricing way the heck down.
It does. And then you get to depreciate your servers and all that other stuff, right?
And make your money back from that. That makes sense. I guess when you look at it that way, I think the virtual desktop infrastructure and interfaces, those are really going to tax the networks of the future, but they're going to be fun. I think as in closing, the point that the last thing that I kind of had on this and I was talking about it was I was looking at the reason that I think that, to break down our entire conversations, why is 10 gigabit not standard in 2022? It boils down to, two major portions: LAN versus WAN, which is, what's your incoming stream at, what's your outgoing stream at, and the fact that there's not a lot of 10 gig plus, WANs coming in. There might be gig plus, but there's not a lot of 10 gig plus still. And physical limitations. Once you get to that point where you're having to run over SFP for fiber or whatnot from a corporate, environment, yes, it's doable. It's somewhat cheap, but the physical limitations of running long Ethernet cables will never, first and foremost, 10 gig Ethernet. I mean, as the standard, you got to look at the distances you're running. You got to look at the physical costs of it, and the limitations that you have with some of that. When you can run a drop that's a third the distance and drop Wi-Fi 6E in, I think 9 times out of 10 that's going to be the method. And like I said, the conversation has looped around with just overall networking in general, which I think that's it's been the fun conversation. I think coming up, me and Chris have been talking about, we kind of want to get more into some of these deep dives on, why infrastructure is the way it is as a whole. So we're going to look at storage in the near future. Hopefully we're going to look at the GPU as a whole. Where's that technology going? Because, and I'll mention this, like I said, in closing as we go, I think this is kind of funny, but there are companies out there that are actually utilizing GPUs now as storage controllers. And there's technology that's been advanced on that end that I don't think a lot of people ever saw as a potential just 5 years ago. So
NVIDIA is doing some crazy stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot, and obviously power draw is becoming an issue, but we're seeing upticks in power usage with everything. That's another reason to pull stuff back into the cloud, is to reduce the overall load and the viewership. And because I think, like you said, I think the next big thing is to pull most everything out of the on-prem setup. And in doing so, I think that's going to really and truly be that reason that you don't have a need for it. Ultimately, the final answer is there isn't a need for 10 gig. 90% of use cases, there isn't a need. Obviously, you'll have random folks like the three of us that might find a way and love to have it, but not a need. Mike, we appreciate you being on. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I know it's late. You need to get home. Chris, take care of that baby. But as not the typical IT guys here, we want to thank everybody for joining us. Feel free to like and subscribe. Get more information about this, and look forward to hearing from you guys in the future. I'm Brad. He's Chris. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah,
See
thanks.
y'all later.